and joined us a little early. We weren't paying attention, I guess, too much of the time, but you'll be happy to know we're talking about animals. Like, it's kind of funny. I tell people that a lot before I introduce everybody. It's not a switch I turn on when I go to work. I can't turn the switch off. Like, I'm permanently animal person. That's what I live, breathe, eat, sleep, drink. I'm actually a very shy person, and people are always like, no way. And I'm like, oh yeah, unless we're talking about animals, I get nervous and I don't have anything to talk about. So, but it's just behind the scenes, you guys caught us. We were talking about donkeys. So, donkeys and animals and kittens and stuff. So welcome everybody. Welcome to this edition this week of the Roundtable with Joey's Legacy. I'm here tonight with, of course, Scott Fine, who is always great to have him here. Sometimes he can't make it, but we're glad to have him tonight. Also tonight, you may have met and know Dr. Cannizzaro. Hi, Dr. Cannizzaro. Oh, did I might have lost sound there for a minute. Did everybody hear her?
Oh, do you have
okay
sound?
No, we're good. Okay. And of course, we have our attorney with us tonight, Anna Morrison-Ricodardi. Hi, how are you?
Hi, good.
I'm so glad to have all of you guys in this room tonight so we can continue on with our mission. Those of you who have not been in here before, welcome. We're so glad to have you. Make sure you get your questions in as fast as you can. We always seem to run out of time and can't get to all the questions. I'm just really quickly going to both apologize and do a little housekeeping here a little bit on how to write the questions out, because I know that you want these really detailed answers from us. And so you want to give us a lot of the question and the backstory. But one of the problems is that we can't solve the problem tonight. We can give you some guidance. So we don't necessarily need to know all of the details. That'll be something that either our attorney or veterinarian would go further and ask questions. So try to just type out the question in the most simplest form, because it's real hard for me to try to read them and understand exactly how to address them to both all three of our panelists tonight. So try to make them real simple so we can get to as many questions as we can, because those questions can help everybody. So so we'll kind of move forward with that. I know that a lot of times, Anna, we will talk about, I have you guys define veterinary malpractice, and we talk about that. And we've done that so many times, but now that we're kind of a little bit more private group, I think most of the people that are listening now know what we're talking about when we talk about veterinary malpractice. But can you tell our listeners why it's important to know the difference between when we walk in and we're emotional about something and because I feel like sometimes that can be such a waste of time I don't want to say waste of time, because there are pets and we lose them, but can you explain a little bit why it's important to know before you start down the road of suing a veterinarian or anybody for that matter?
Right. Well, it's important because, and I always go to the Merriam-Webster definition, because it's actually the best one for malpractice, and it is a dereliction of professional duty or failure to exercise an ordinary degree professional skill or learning, by one rendering professional service, which results in injury, loss, or damage. There's really two components to it. It's a breach of the standard of care, and that but for that breach, your animal would have otherwise lived or had a chance of survival. The difference is that if your animal dies, and everybody is emotional, when it's your animal, your family member who dies. But if the veterinarian is not responsible for that, like let's say your animal had cancer and the treatment was appropriate, it just didn't work. Or let's say the veterinarian was faced with a question, like there were two possibilities. There was A and there was B, and they were equally likely to result in success or at least a chance of life. And they, let's say they picked A and they, maybe B would have worked, we don't know. That's not a breach of the standard of care. A breach of the standard of care is when a reasonably skilled veterinarian, they would have picked A in every, in the situation, they would have picked A, and it was a reasonably skilled veterinarian would not have picked B for any number of reasons, such as like there was a contraindication or something going on. But if they should have picked A and they picked B, then that is a breach of the standard of care. And then that's when you go down the road of looking at, did that breach result in the damages. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But that's why the experts, like our first step in all of these cases, is to have a veterinarian or someone who's skilled in the veterinary sciences review the case, because they can tell you if that breach, if there was a breach of the standard of care, and two, if that breach resulted in damages. Because if you don't have, either of those, you have to have them both. You can't sue for professional malpractice or veterinary malpractice.
Yeah. I want to keep clarifying it, because I think people really just, when you're in that emotional state, and you want it to so badly be somebody's fault. And so when pet parents are focused on it being someone's fault, they can't see, the forest through the trees kind of thing. They just want it to be somebody else's fault. And it's really hard, Dr. Cannizzaro. I know you've probably been in these situations where you're really trying to explain to the pet parent, look, we've done what we could do, and it's an unfortunate thing. Can you share any of those times where you felt like you were really trying to help somebody and they just couldn't help themselves? I know it seems like a weird thing for me to bring up, but I really want to help people see the value of this organization, and also the value in it, even if they don't have a case that is veterinary malpractice. Do you see what I mean? Like,
I'm not 100% sure exactly what your question is.
Okay. Have you had any cases where you felt like you were trying to help someone see that it wasn't something that somebody did wrong, like maybe a veterinarian that worked for you or one that you've been in, and they just want it to be your fault?
I think, I mean, the most recent are cases that I've been working with that come to me from Joey's Legacy. And I know those are very difficult, because most of the time when they reach out to one of us veterinarians, they do feel like there was a wrongdoing. They feel already pretty convinced that there is. So I think those are really difficult. And some of the things that are extraordinarily difficult is that I tell people, and I hope they can understand, especially from this podcast, that I have to go by the materials that are provided to me. So if the pet parent gives me a documentation about what happened, I have to look for something that's going to back up in the medical records. And what's really frustrating to me in my day-to-day practice, because I'm a homeopathic holistic veterinarian, I always ask my clients for all of the medical records, the doctor notes, including all the test results. That helps me understand what's been going on up to the point in time that I'm taking on and seeing the pet, because it gives me some historical information and background. So I can say with certainty that a lot of those medical records that I received, including the ones from the Joey's Legacy pet parents that are coming to me, are really devoid of a lot of information. And that is not to the pet parent's benefit. And it makes it really hard for us, because it's not that I don't believe them, but we have to have kind of corroborating evidence, so to speak, to really say that the veterinarian did something wrong. So
Right.
Those are really difficult. I think those are the hardest ones. Excuse me, I knocked my desk. Those are the really hardest ones, because I completely get it, what the pet parent is saying, and I don't disbelieve them. And I am sure that Anna probably can resonate with this really, really well. And it becomes, one person's word against another. And it isn't that I value the veterinarian's word necessarily as much, but we have to be able to find something somewhere in the records that help to point to that, to that particular, that there is actually some wrongdoing, versus, well, they appeared to do what they could, but things have been done a little bit better, maybe, I don't know, but is that ultimately the cause of the horror that this pet parent has gone through? And sometimes that's just really hard to discern and really put down on paper. For my clients, it's hard. I think what's incredibly hard for me is having a long-term relationship with my clients, doing everything that I can in a disease state that really carries a poor prognosis. But I can't think of too many times, I think, because I'm so I really explain things thoroughly with my clients, and I never stop trying, and I never stop working. I can think of one, I'll probably get emotional, that I've been working with for many years, a young dog that is in end stage kidney disease. And it's extremely hard. You know, you want to do something more than can possibly be done at this time of what we have available. And I have a lot available as a holistic homeopathic veterinarian, but we can't manufacture new tissue all the time, or at least not fast enough. So I don't know if that adequately answered your question, to what you were getting after.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to kind of set this part of this podcast particularly is, when we allow our emotions to take over, we make it harder for the case to go forward, right? Anna, wouldn't you say that, like, if we can step back emotionally,
you have to look at, you got to look at the facts, because and there's something too, just to Dr. Cannizzaro's point, and also to Carrie's point, like, when you get a veterinary review, you kind of have to go in with a more open mind of, you know, not trying to blame someone, because I think there's an underlying current that the pet parents, because we're in a situation where we can't speak directly to our animals, you know, we know that they rely on us, and their first, you know, thought is like, did I fail my pet by bringing my pet to the wrong vet, or something else, or what happened here? And so when you go to the vets for the reviews, you have to go open-minded and say, this could have been anything. I want to find out what happened. You know, like, it has to be more open-ended than, I really think the vet did something wrong. And a lot of times people get that that feeling because maybe they encountered the vet on a very bad day, they were treated badly, the professional skill was low, you know, as opposed to, I shouldn't say professional, the interaction skill was low, bad side manner, terrible, something to that end, you know, whereas when we have the veterinarians review this, because and again, I should probably note, all 50 states are somewhat different in how they treat these laws, but there are general trends. And when I speak about these are the trends, and these are the general concepts. But when you have a specific case, you do have to check with the attorney in your state, because the laws do differ enough that's why attorneys can only practice in the states that they're licensed in. But when you do look at this, you know, the trend is that the first thing a vet's going to look at are the records, because there's the concept of business records. And the reason there's a little bit higher authority or authenticity kind of given to these records is because they're done in the daily course of business, meaning that, like, when people look at them, they don't really think that there's going to be a reason that someone would put in wrong information. Now, those of us who have encountered some of these things where they were changed after the fact, or that, we know that there can be instances where that has occurred. But initially, the veterinarians are going to look at the records. And if the records are such that they don't make sense, the veterinarians are actually going to pick up on that as well. You know, the reviewing vet is going to say, well, hey, you know, there's a gap here. This doesn't make any sense. And that also lends, you know, maybe more credibility to a person, you know, to the animal guardian, you know, the pet parent statement that, hey, these records don't seem right. You know, and we've seen instances, you know, where a vet has found, like, hey, these are the wrong x-rays, or these are the wrong, you know, something's wrong here. But you have to let the veterinarians look at the records themselves first, you know, in the whole context of all the records that you can get for your animal, because they're going to see the trend. And in instances where there's a disagreement in the records, you know, all the veterinarians can really do, because they don't get to say who's more credible and who's not. That's the trier of fact. That's the judge. That's the jury. That's whoever's, you know, looking at all this. All they can say is, here's what I see in the records. Based on the records, you know, here's what I would have done differently, or here's what, not even what I would have done, what a reasonable veterinarian would have done, you know, in this situation, you know, versus, you know, they look at the testimonial and say, well, if this testimonial is true, then yes, I see a problem. If this testimonial is not true, then no, then there wasn't a problem. So that's all they can really do. They can't pass judgment on the credibility of the statements. They can simply say, under this scenario, this would have been okay. Under this other scenario, it would not have been okay.
Yeah. It's really, really hard, as you know, I've been working with Scott for quite a while now, and trying to help people that find themselves in this situation, setting them up for success. So what I'm trying to say is, if we do have somebody whose pet, unfortunately, hopefully doesn't have to go through veterinary malpractice, setting them up from the moment that thing, whatever it is that happens with their pet, if their pet dies, the very first interaction that they have with that veterinarian could be the beginning of a successful case or a failure from the very first words that come out of their mouth. And so when I say take the emotion out of it, it's because I want the case to be successful. And when we're attacking veterinarians and coming off as accusatory right away, a judge, correct me if I'm wrong, is not going to want to find you a credible person if we're attacking. So we have to come in right away. And just like you said, Anna, I think perfectly was, don't come in and accuse. Don't say, what did you say? Come in and say, I want to find out what happened. Not you did this or you did that.
I would say the majority of the Joey's legacies that I've received, the majority of them have said, look, this veterinarian did wrongdoing. Will you look at these records? And I've had a couple of them even pressure me when I've had preliminary looks, and I said, I'm not sure that there's something here. Not that I don't believe your version of it, but the records don't back it up. And if I could say anything to the listeners, be kind to us. We're doing the best that we can as veterinarians to try to look at these cases objectively. And I'm going to say personally, and I've said this before on the podcast, and I'll say it again, that, I'm a homeopathic holistic veterinarian. So believe me, when I'm looking at these records, I see some things that makes the hair stand on the back of my neck, because allopathic medicine is just a very harmful way of treating, but it doesn't rise to malpractice. And I have to look at these cases as what would a reasonable allopathic veterinarian do? And allopathic medicine is what's typically considered traditional veterinary medicine. So I have to approach those cases. If I can be a voice for listeners to know that they have other options that are safer, it doesn't mean they're going to work. It doesn't mean that what I do fixes every particular animal that comes my way. I sure wish that was the case, but I have a lot more successes than allopathic medicine does. So believe me, I see a lot of things that really make my hair stand on end, all the medications that are given. And could they be contributory to what happened to, the people's pet? Absolutely, it could be. But it doesn't rise to malpractice because it's standard of care to use all of those horrible drugs in combination, as it is in human medicine. And in human medicine, they do the same thing to people. And it is, again, it's hair raising. So education, educating yourself, empowering yourself is important, not just from the allopathic medicine side, but also knowing that you have some other choices that could potentially work out better. So you don't get sucked into National Dental Month, where you get pushed into anesthetic dental cleaning for a little bit of staining on the pet's teeth. Do I think that should be malpractice? Sure. Yeah, I do. But it doesn't rise to the boards deciding that that is malpractice. I mean, unless I guess there's nothing on the animal's teeth. So it's very difficult. And so be really kind to us before, during, and after, because, we don't do this easily. We as veterinarians are not doing this easily. It's not fun to go after colleagues. It's not fun to see them make mistakes. It's not fun to, see them communicate poorly. And I want to say, to your point, that it's critically important, and I touched on this in some of the other podcasts, to understand that when veterinarians feel like they're being accused of malpractice, it is standard to become defensive. And then communication breaks down. And then in addition to that, veterinarians behave, it appears as if they don't care. I mean, imagine if you were being accused of something that you didn't do, or in your heart you felt you didn't do, and somebody's coming at you. Imagine how you would feel if that were occurring to you. And it doesn't mean the vet may not have done something wrong. And I can assure you, every veterinarian who has lost a pet has a profound negative experience about that. It's heartfelt for most veterinarians. I don't know very many that could care less. And so there's those emotions that are swirling at the same time of, oh my gosh, is this client going to sue me, whether it's a valid thing or not? So there's a lot packed in here, and we as veterinarians are human, just the same as you pet parents are. We're pet parents too. So we couldn't imagine losing any of our own either. So, hang in there. We'll do the best we can for you, but, just make sure you understand that there may be not enough evidence in the records. Your view of how things went may be totally accurate. It may be close to accurate. If there isn't the documented evidence to be able to back that up. And I'm afraid there's a lot of missing information in records, as I alluded to earlier. That's a problem and should be a noticeable problem in veterinary medicine. And none of us have a lot of time to write records, but write stuff down, veterinarians, if you're listening, write stuff down because it's important. It's critically important on both sides of the aisle. It's important.
Both sides. We have a question coming in through Natalie real quick. Or do you want to answer, Anna? Do you want to say something to that and then we'll ask this question?
Yeah, no, I saw some of that, and I just wanted to say too, what's more very, very important is even before anything happens with your companion animal, and again, I'm trying to move towards the companion animal term rather than pet, because it has more of your companion animal is really part of your family, and pet doesn't seem appropriate in a lot of situations, but it's everyone knows what we mean here. But that said, when you're going to the vet, you should get the records every single time. You'll usually get an invoice, but ask for the records. Say, I'd like a copy of the records. I'd like the handwritten notes, any boarding sheets,
Absolutely.
The drug logs, whatever it is they have, because you want to keep that file handy because, and I saw in our question, and I'll let Carrie, introduce the question, but there are some things you should be doing and can be doing because as we all have known, and we have an example of a really great veterinarian here. But there are veterinarians that are not so great. And there are veterinarians who, the minute something happened, they panic and start changing files. I mean, it's, and a lot of times it happens with veterinarians that are kind of newer. Sometimes it happens with the typed in notes, like any notes that can be changed, or when a veterinarian, like if you notice as you're going through these vet treatments that your vet doesn't have very good records, then maybe it's time to look for another vet because you want everything in there. And a lot of times when, pet parents have said, hey, I think there's something wrong in the records. What we'll often tell them is you need to write a letter to them and say, this was left out of the records. I note that this is not part of the records, but we fully discussed this and I'd like to know why it's not there. And sometimes, this has to be done right away after the visits, just to be sure those records are complete. And sometimes it's after the fact, when they find, a lot of times pet parents have, or, companion animal guardians haven't looked at these records until their animal has passed and they suspect something went wrong. And then they see there's all these gaps. So that's why you want to be asking for these records as you go all the time. And if there are gaps, you want to send a letter in, and say, hey, I noticed you didn't record this conversation we had. And I'd just like to make sure the record's complete because I want to make sure that my companion has the best, care, that I have reported this correctly, or that I know what I'm doing, with your instructions. And also,
on patterns, right? So you can look at patterns like, oh, my dog went there for 10 years and they never did anything. But on the day she died, we've got all these records, like patterns, right? Like those little tiny details that you don't even think. If you have a history with the same veterinarian and then suddenly something goes wrong, you can bring those up in court. That's why you're saying get all this history for all sorts of reasons. You want those records.
But the falsification. The falsification of accounts, that has happened, and what's interesting is that some of the things that, it's very tough because of that, there's that authenticity sort of in, kind of granted automatically to business records that maybe shouldn't be when there's a lot on the line. But it's something that, you need to kind of monitor. And if they are computer systems, if you end up going to court, or the very first thing, if you suspect that, is you need to send out a litigation hold, which says, hey, there may be litigation going on. I want you to preserve all the documents here. And some of the computer systems, have something that, you find out who their software provider is, you see how that software works. And, you can do a forensic analysis. Do you want to have to do this? No, it's extremely expensive. You don't want to ever have to do that. But it does exist, for things that can be followed. But one of the things too, and I noticed from Corey, in cases where we found information by subpoenaing records, from the IDFPR, or like the disciplinary body, where it showed that there was a very different account provided to them than was provided in the civil case. And that was very interesting. you know, just to know. And a lot of times they will fight. Yeah, they will fight getting any of the documents from the disciplinary body, because these cases are sometimes run parallel. You know, they don't intersect. Disciplinary is different, you know, from civil, but the information obtained is often the same. And you'll get a great deal of pushback when you're looking to get information, you know, from these disciplinary bodies as it relates to a civil case. But there are some ways you can challenge it. And one of the things is after the fact, when if you know that the records have been fudged, sometimes, you know, clients, or sometimes, you know, companion animal guardians have sent in letters to the vet saying, you know, I reviewed these records. This is the first time I've seen them. And here, and here is different from what you told me on this date. And so that can be at least some documentation to show that there is a challenge to the records. And again, you know, when there's, you know, pretty significant gaps, it's sometimes it's very hard for a reviewing veterinarian to see what's wrong. But another very key part is necropsy, or you know, basically the autopsy, animal autopsy that would follow, because a lot of people, you know, don't really think about this. They're in a state of grief, you know, right away after their animal is passed. But if your animal passed and you suspect it's something that happened in surgery, maybe a bleed out, or you know, something, you know, that pertain to the vet's skills, you know, during a procedure, you've got to try to get that gross necropsy. And then if you believe it may be something pertaining to the drugs, you know, there may be a limited amount of time that drug can be detected in the system. So it's kind of planning ahead if something happened, you know, to get the samples you need and to get those reports that you would need to basically rule out that, okay, well, no, my animal didn't die of, you know, massive cancer throughout, you know, his or her body. It was because, you know, there was a bleed out or there was something else. Because when you don't have that necropsy or the report, which should be done at a different hospital, not the hospital that, you know, made the error, but, you know, that you suspect made the error, but somewhere else, because you want to have those clear eyes on it. And you should know that, and I don't know if this is a testament to like how veterinarians have gotten along for years, you know, with each other, but it's not the same way in the field of law. You know, you can find a lawyer who will testify against another lawyer just by walking down the street, you know, you'll find one. But pretty much every veterinarian I've deposed has said, even the experts, you know, for our own cases have said that the veterinary community is very congenial. They get along. They don't like to make waves. So for veterinarians to kind of come out and testify that, yes, I see that another veterinarian made a mistake or did something wrong, they don't want to do it because, you know, it's not, you know, it's it goes very much against the grain of their, you know, working environment. And it's not just to the extent of getting referrals, you know, because that's true for, you know, veterinarians, they refer within the community, but also, you know, just, it's not that the way things are done. It used to be that way in human, you know, human malpractice cases. It used to be very hard, like, you know, probably like 30 years ago or so, maybe more, you know, to get a human doctor to talk, you know, to testify against another. But, you know, it eventually came around, and we're lucky to have veterinarians who will review these files. But oftentimes you're going to have to go out of state to find one to testify in your own case.
Let's look at. I want to add something important that you brought up that I think could be helpful for listeners. For veterinarians that do, even if it's with your staff, for veterinarians that do accept emails, if you see any kind of discrepancy in the record of something you had discussed and it's not in the record, email it, because emails back and forth between the veterinarian or the staff and the pet person, those are perfectly legal documents, and it'll fill in some of those gaps, because some veterinarians, even if you just write them a letter, they'll do nothing about it. They'll say, my record is my record and I'm not doing anything more with it. So don't be afraid to send emails if your veterinarian accepts emails. I mean, I receive emails all the time from my clients, and it helps me as knowing about updates and things like that. And then I respond back about what I want them to do, et cetera. So these are still part of our legal records. And I happen to keep it in a place on my computer, and often we'll print it off and add it to the file. But don't be afraid to email, because if you write a letter to the veterinarian, unless it's certified, return receipt, it's not going to matter very much, because if they don't respond or they don't do anything, There's no correspondence back and forth. I don't know how much weight that'll have. It's still worth doing if that's all you have. But I tell my clients all the time, do request the actual doctor notes and all test results, because what if you travel out of town, or you have a hurricane, or you have to evacuate for some reason? It's really good to have those. Or if you move, because most veterinarians, and it varies state by state, will only maintain records for up to 3 years, and then we can shred them or permanently get rid of them. So stay on top of it for all the reasons we've already discussed. But in addition, look and see how thorough your veterinarian seems to be. And that way too, if they aren't really cooperative with you, if you're writing them a letter or asking them about missing information in the record, or they get defensive, you've got a pretty good idea how it'll go if there's a bump in the road. God forbid if it's a bad one. So take a cue from that, and you know, make a better selection. Interview veterinarians. Don't be afraid to do that.
So let's shift a little bit and talk about how do we, Natalie brings up the question about witnesses. So when the veterinarian says one thing and we're against this, he said, she said, the veterinarian has records written down. In Natalie's case, she, of course, had nothing except a eyewitness. How strong are those, and how can we use an eyewitness?
Eyewitnesses are good, you know, in the sense that you want to get them to write down what they, you know, saw, heard, you know, everything that they personally observed, you know, in an affidavit as soon as possible, or even in a video statement. That's something that people have been doing, you know, I guess even more recently, is that, you know, when there comes, you know, to be a challenge, you know, if you had a witness present, you want to, you know, make sure that that witness can tell you what they saw. Sometimes the witnesses may not be as strong. I wouldn't say as strong, but there's a inherent bias. Like usually it's a spouse or a child or a relative, you know, who may be present, that's, you know, bolstering, you know, the companion animal guardian side, you know, versus the vet side. But sometimes, you know, you may have a witness who is a technician, and sometimes they don't work there anymore. And if you reach out to them, they may give you a very true and accurate, you know, statement if they remember it. Now, remembering they see hundreds and thousands of animals in a given year, or hundreds, you know, at least, you know, so they may not remember the specifics. But if there is something, you know, that does stand out, usually if an animal passes, that's something memorable, and that, you know, they may very well recall later. So witnesses, you know, like technicians, or, you know, someone else, especially if they no longer work there, reception persons, others, you know, present, you know, will be helpful. There may be an implied bias, though, if they're part of your family, just as there is a somewhat of an implied bias for a technician who may still work for that veterinarian or at that hospital. But yeah, as soon as you can get the information from that witness, you know, definitely the better. If they want to write the statement, or even a video statement, you know, can be extremely helpful. I don't know how open veterinarians are to being recorded.
I was going to ask you that.
You absolutely have to ask. You absolutely.
But you can ask, and that is something you can do. I just had somebody ask to record me in a nutrition consult. I didn't have a problem with it. It's hard to remember things and write things down and understand it, and I didn't care if they recorded it. So, but is it legal in all states that you know of? I know you're in Illinois, but right?
Yeah. There you have to check your state, because there's some things, and it's usually with phones, you know, like there's one party consent and then there's two party consent. I know Illinois is a two party consent. So if another person does not agree to being recorded, you can't use that. You know, you can't record them, you can't use it unless there's, you know, something, you know, to do with felonies and, you know, criminal things that are, you know, outside my wheelhouse in civil court. But you have to ask for that. But the reason it's come up more in the veterinary areas, and people have asked me about it more often, is because that's what they're doing in human medicine. You know, is that a lot of people are having trouble remembering kind of some of the instructions their doctors have given them. So, you know, they've started recording it and asking for permission to record it. And most of the doctors have said yes. And so they, you know, have said, well, can I do this with the veterinarian? And you do have to ask. And that's one of the things we get in discovery all the time is, you know, the other side is asking us, you know, if there are any conversations that have been recorded, because, you know, at least in Illinois, you know, there are eavesdropping laws. And if you record a phone conversation without consent, you can get sued for that. So you have to be very careful. You have to, you know, in checking on your state laws, you know, check on what consent is needed. But yeah, it would be really helpful if you could record them, not just for your own, not for, proof in a lawsuit, but to be able to remember what the veterinarian has told you to do. Because you may get a sheet afterwards that says, here's some things to do, but not everybody understands that as well. Or they, may not have the comprehension, as if they were told and said, hey, well, this is on the sheet, but here's what I think you should do, in addition to this or instead.
So I'm gonna move back to something Natalie said for you, Dr. Cannizzaro. Before I do, we also have a question. What about if somebody calls and leaves a voicemail?
Yeah.
So they know they're being recorded. They left a voicemail. Is that something that can be used in court?
Well, that's inherently, you get a voicemail, right. You're leaving your message there. Generally speaking, yes. You would still have to authenticate it. You would still have to, say like, this came in on my phone, get your phone records, have someone to say, I listened to it, and make sure you save it. But yeah, that's, that would be something that, we have used, and, again, check the state laws, but it definitely is much more amenable to entering that into evidence than, if you were to simply just record a conversation. Now, what a lot of people have done is they've had someone they've been speaking with on speakerphone, and another witness in the room can say, yes, I heard this on the speakerphone and this is what was said. And again, sometimes that's, helpful and useful for evidence. But again, when you get into like, this is what one person said, this is what the other person said, it's going to be for the trier of fact to determine that credibility. And that's, it's not, you just don't know how that's going to play out. But yeah, voicemails, that's something that you routinely, entered into evidence. You just have to make sure you preserved it. You've gotten your phone records. It says, yes, this came in, and you want to try, if you're getting phone records, you want to try to preserve those right away, because the phone companies don't keep those forever either.
Yeah, you can lose it. Dr. Cannizzaro, going back to Natalie, she's talking about in her cat's situation, it says my cat the aspiration pneumonia occurred during surgery. She has witnesses that heard the conversation, but later the vet changed, saying to me that the aspiration happened prior to admission.
Wow.
I'm not quite sure the details on it, and we have some time so we can get into it, but I'm not sure I understand how that would differ. Dr. Cannizzaro.
I think it depends on who the witness is. Similar to what she said. I think it would depend on who the witness is. Is that somebody that was sitting during a speakerphone conversation? Was it a technician that was involved during the surgical procedure? Certainly that would carry quite a lot of weight. I mean, to me, I would think a speakerphone, more than one person hearing what was going on the speakerphone and then the story changing after that, to me, that would be significant. Because it doesn't make sense that there would be a change in the conversation about the aspiration pneumonia.
Yeah, well, yeah, because I'm just wondering, like, Natalie, maybe you can tell us a little bit. I know I said give us little detail, but did your cat die? Because oh yeah, pet's death. The aspiration either occurred during the surgery or happened prior to admission. So is the vet saying that the cat came in and already had pneumonia before the surgery?
I would ask them, why would they proceed with
why would they do it?
If there was difficulty breathing? If there is no evidence of difficulty breathing, and they go forward with anesthesia, there's no reasonable expectation that there was a lung disease present prior to anesthesia. So how a veterinarian could discern that had to have occurred before the procedure would be difficult to document unless her cat was actually exhibiting symptoms of difficulty breathing.
She says her cat vomited during induction.
Well, that would be during the procedure. That would not be before the procedure.
It's not before. So right. I'm sure this is why she wants to get to the bottom of this. I would too, because I wouldn't think that a vet would be doing surgery on an animal who aspirated and had pneumonia.
If they were, then I think that would be cause for action. I mean,
right.
From my perspective, not knowing any additional information. A lot of the induction agents and things that we may use under anesthesia can cause nausea. And many practices, or most practices, will use anti-nausea medications to pre-medicate to try to prevent that. And aspiration pneumonia, if a vomit occurred during induction, we may not necessarily know that aspiration occurred, but then again, you'd really have to ask the question, was her cat intubated at the time of the vomit, which would protect the airway, or had they not intubated at that time, meaning did they pass the endotracheal tube prior to the vomiting occurring, or did the vomit occur before that? And was there reason to believe that there could have been aspiration? Because not all vomiting results in aspiration, even during induction. Not to say that it couldn't happen, but that further information would be definitely necessary.
So Anna, I think my question now, I'm so interested in this case, Natalie. So my question would be, in her first question, Natalie's concerned with the fact that he said one thing, then said another thing. For me, I'm thinking if he's going to go with the fact that the cat aspirated before he came in for surgery, wouldn't that be the case you want to take on? Well, then why did you do the surgery?
Right. The tricky part is not really understanding like how aspirate, like how it occurred. Because like I've had some veterinary experts say that once something like that happens, like if you get the acid, and please correct me, doctor, because I this is not my, I'm not a veterinarian, but if it does happen, there's not much you can do afterwards, to correct it, or you just sometimes the an animal will recover or they won't. But you wouldn't think that if there was a suspicion of it that you would go forward unless it was an absolute emergency. But I think this one is definitely more for the doctor, because you look at it and you think, okay, well, if an animal has suffered a aspiration pneumonia, something that happened, or a vomit that got into their lungs, that you would not want to go forward with the surgery. But again, if there was an emergency that made it so that they had to, or that the animal's best chance of survival came by going ahead with the surgery, then that might be a different situation.
Sure. Natalie, why was your cat?
That would be correct.
It was an emergency, but there was nothing wrong with his breathing prior to induction, but he was in for an emergency situation.
If the emergency situation was gastrointestinal related,
Hairball.
a hairball, there may or may not have been something that the veterinarian could have done about that. Although I would say that the veterinarian should have proceeded with caution if there was nausea involved in the case to begin with, and made sure that they used anti-nausea medication prior to induction, and did everything that they could. And again, it'll boil down to how big the emergency is. Because if there was significant suspicion that aspiration occurred, and yes, maybe they needed to tend to the hairball, but it wasn't causing a complete obstruction, it wasn't imminently dangerous to, proceed toward death, for example, if that were to be the case, then it would seem to me that it would be appropriate to make sure that everything was okay as far as the lungs, if there was reason to suspect there was aspiration that had occurred during induction, instead of proceeding with the surgery. But again, with the records and information would probably tell more. The problem in this case is that if the cat was undergoing emergency surgery for what was perceived to be an emergency because of a hairball, you already had a gastrointestinal problem.
Right.
So right there, we could expect there could be the risk of vomit and aspiration, even with induction.
She said there was no evidence of them using anti-nausea, and she said it wasn't dangerous. It wasn't imminently dangerous. So,
that was just a judgment call by the veterinarian. I'm not sure that I would have agreed with that judgment call. It depends on if the veterinarian had reason to suspect that aspiration occurred. It sounds to me like the veterinarian did, and maybe in hindsight, when things didn't go so well, decided to maybe change their story. And again, I'm just reaching because I don't know. But there isn't a good reason. I mean, the veterinarian would not be necessarily at fault if her cat had vomited during induction if there was a gastrointestinal problem to begin with. So there isn't a reason to lie unless you're nervous that maybe somebody's going to be litigious about it. And then you want to make the story seem more favorable for yourself. But changing the story after the fact is a bit odd. I mean, yeah, I don't know how that could hold water
is,
one way or
but
another.
being little devil's advocate, because I think you have to do that in order to get a strong case, could both have occurred? Right? Could aspirated during vomiting before the surgery and during the surgery, could both occur, right?
I mean, I think
there would have been some evidence of respiratory difficulty. I mean, unless the vomit and aspiration happened, really quickly before induction, for example. And once the poor baby is in the care of the veterinarian, I mean, we're responsible for, paying attention to them. And if there's an emergent situation that requires surgery, I'd like to think that there were a lot of eyes on the cat, so somebody would know whether or not the cat had vomited, maybe aspirated. But certainly,
they actually record that she has records saying no respiratory problems prior to surgery.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty
sounds
strong.
like a pretty strong case right there.
Yeah. I guess there are some issues like. So, Dr. Cannizzaro, how do you? I guess one of the things is, how did they find out that it was aspirate pneumonia that killed, the animal? I mean, because is it something that you find in necropsy, or is it something that you discern from the respiratory issues? I mean, how is that discerned?
Well, there's a couple of ways. Prior to passing, we could do X-rays, and aspiration pneumonia typically occurs in the middle lung lobe. That's the most common because it's the first major airway drop from the respiratory tract. So if we see a pneumonia in that area and we have a history of vomiting in our presence or concern for aspiration, it is a reasonable deduction when they're still alive. I suspect that the respiratory distress occurred at some point, but remember, your listeners should know also that some cats can have adverse reactions to anesthesia that can cause profound respiratory disease and even death. So, I think it'd be important to know, well, is that really it? And of course, necropsy is the best way to determine, because then you're going to find vomitus in the airway. And then that's a slam dunk. You know exactly that it was aspiration pneumonia. This was not an adverse reaction to anesthesia, which in most cases is really not the veterinarian's fault. In a case like that.
Dr. Cannizzaro, he went into respiratory arrest afterwards. He started oozing fluid from his nose and was wheezing.
Yeah, well, it's hard to say because either of those could fit a scenario. Most anesthetic deaths with respiratory kind of a respiratory shock occur, maybe immediately following the procedure or during the procedure at some point in time. Typically, they don't get discharged home and then have a problem. That would fit aspiration pneumonia more than an adverse event to anesthesia, which usually occurs during or at the very end of anesthesia, are the most common times that that's going to occur. If the pet wakes up from anesthesia and seems pretty stable, then it's not likely a direct adverse anesthetic event. It could be to pain medication or anything more long-lasting that occurs after the anesthetic procedure. But without knowing more, that's probably the best that I could say in answer to your question.
Shouldn't there be somebody else in the room too with the person doing the surgery or emergency procedure if there's anesthesia being given? Or is it not like in the human medical where there's always like an anesthesiologist? Is it sometimes just the veterinarian monitoring the anesthesia as well as doing the procedure? And is that accepted?
Unfortunately, it is accepted. I mean, in most cases, a certified vet tech, even when I was doing surgery, I had a tech monitoring. I was monitoring and the tech was monitoring because they were at the anesthesia equipment. I didn't do it entirely by myself. I didn't feel comfortable doing that. Not because I'm not skilled, but I want as many eyes on as possible. I to my knowledge, and I'm not an expert in this, I think it's still standard of care if a veterinarian is monitoring anesthesia and doing the procedure. I don't agree with that. And I don't think it happens in the majority of cases, but you also have to ask about the skill set of the individual that's working with you. Because if you have somebody who doesn't have very much experience and they're monitoring anesthesia, that's a problem. Because it's tough to juggle the two. Believe me, it's stressful.
Occasionally, just to note, there can be instances where the standard of care for the industry as a whole is too low. So just know that if there are enough doctors or veterinarians that say, you know, I don't think that this, you know, this is okay, you know, and we're seeing it more in the dental fields where you know, there are experts stepping in and saying, you know, like, look, these, whatever these standards are, they are not sufficient, you know, and so just know that there are challenges that can be made. They're harder, but if there are veterinarians that feel strongly that whatever this person is claiming the standard of care is, or whatever it may well be, is too low for the industry with what the current, you know, abilities are. So just keep that in mind, back of your mind, and always, you know, check with your attorney in your state to see what, you know, what the trends are.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
If your pet is undergoing a dental procedure, anesthetic dental procedure, or an anesthesia, ask the veterinarian, you know, who is going to be monitoring anesthesia, if anybody. And well, I shouldn't say if anybody, because the veterinarian could do it, but I'm going to tell you, it's a real juggle when you're, you know, really focusing on the procedure that you're, you know, attempting to do. I don't know too many veterinarians that don't have a technician, and I can't speak to all veterinarians. I used to do a lot of relief work, so I've been around to a lot of practices before I was doing my own practice. In most instances, it was pretty rare that any of us would be entirely by ourselves in the operating room. There was usually one or more individuals in the room, but it would be rare there would be two veterinarians in the room. That would be rare, very rare.
I worked for a clinic, and you know, before I say this, I am sorry, I was really young and I didn't know any better. This is how I was taught to do it. But we would do a lot of spay and neuters, and so in one room I would prep the dogs or cats and then bring them to the surgery room and hook them up however they needed to be hooked up. And then the doctor would begin the surgery, monitoring the anesthesia, doing the surgery, and I would go and prep the other. So definitely alone in the surgery room the whole time that he was doing surgery, with no one in there to help monitor or do anything. So I don't know. I think it still does happen like that. And people have this vision. We talked about it before on the program of, we see these surgeries on TV that they're doing on humans, and it's, you know, 12 people and someone's monitoring the heart rate and the anesthesia, and it's quiet and their doors closed and everybody's masked up and gloved up and it's sterile and it's all this stuff. And it's just not the same in most, I don't want to say most veterinary clinics, but in some veterinary clinics, it is not like that. I've seen it where the surgeon's doing surgery and he's eating pizza with one hand. You know, I've seen some really horrible stuff.
Wow.
Really, really, really horrible stuff that I have seen. And so I know it can happen. And I think, you know, one of the things that Natalie talks about is that in her state, there's no requirement for vet techs to be licensed. And I think that's very, very important. And that doesn't happen either. A lot of times, you know, save money, they use somebody that's not a licensed veterinary technician. And there are no laws that I know of either that you have to have a registered veterinary technician.
I'm not aware that there's any laws in Florida for that either. And everybody that I've ever used, including the individuals that are working with me now, are not certified. I don't provide surgery or anesthesia any longer, but you know, if I'm going to draw blood or any, I do all of that. I mean, they may help restrain. I've taught them how to restrain, but I do not allow them to draw blood. I'm glad you bring that up, because emergency shifts.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's okay to not have a registered vet tech, depending on what procedures you're doing and how you're doing it,
or their training. Their training, because there are certifications.
There are some non-certified veterinary assistants that are as accomplished or more accomplished than certified vet techs. It's really incumbent upon the veterinarian to make sure that the individuals they're working with are properly trained, and that we as the veterinarian choose what we feel they are truly capable of doing and not doing in a safe manner. And you know, I just tend to be overprotective, and I always wanted to draw blood, and I always paid attention to the anesthesia when I used to do dentals. That was ages ago. I actually did anesthesia, they did the dental, and you know, I was anal about that. I just did do that. And I also required that all of the animals had to have pre-anesthetic blood work. But I was doing a lot of this stuff back in the day when we didn't even have all the great monitoring equipment that's available to us. But I need your listeners to know also that veterinarians are not required to spend money, which we have to spend out of our own pockets, for all the expensive monitoring equipment. I did, you know, have a lot of good monitoring equipment once it became available, but anything that would make me feel comfortable, or I never felt comfortable with anesthesia. How can you?
Yep.
You know, it was incredibly stressful for me. I suspect it probably is to a lot of my colleagues, because
Yeah.
none of us want to lose an animal under anesthesia ever. I mean, you don't want to make that call ever.
It's horrible.
Right. And yeah,
but-
it does all fall on the veterinarian. So I mean, if they decide to do these surgeries on their own, and you know, a reasonable vet would say, look, that's way too complicated. You couldn't have done, you know, monitoring at the same time as doing this complicated surgery. I mean, ultimately it will fall on them. But you know, I did see a question there, so I wanted to give Carrie the I guess
When I was a kid, that was what the bullies would call me, Harry Carey. So it's good.
Oh no. No, it's just me. It's Sunday, and it's, you know, it's a long week, end of a long week.
Hey,
I
I
knew.
how long it took me to get Ricodardi out of my mouth. Correct. We're even. Don't worry about it. Before we go into that question, because we spent a lot of time on Natalie's cat. Natalie, what was your kitty's name? I would really like to just know what your cat's name is. Now I feel like I've invested in so much of the death of your cat, and I just want to thank you so much for sharing that story. But please tell me what your kitty's name is, so we can all kind of know him by name a little bit. And we're so sorry that you're going through that. While Olaf was
Olaf?
his name.
Olaf.
Olaf was
I
his
love
name.
that name.
We're so sorry to hear about Olaf. I think you should definitely, from what we've heard here, I think you should pursue it. Maybe Scott already knows about your case, and hopefully, you know, something will come of it, even if it is, you know, I always say this too. I mean, I don't think you want it to be veterinary malpractice. I know in our heart when we're upset, but who wants to find out that their animal died at the hands of somebody? So even if you pursue these things and find out it wasn't, I think that's the better outcome, is that it wasn't anybody's fault. And I think that would be the one I would want. I would definitely prefer to know that the veterinarian didn't do this negligently or in malpractice. So I think people should pursue them. I'm glad that's why Scott and Joey's Legacy is here, because it can help in the emotional state, even if it isn't your case. I had to tell a client of that one time, telling her, I have the video, I want you to watch it because I want you to be comfortable in knowing nothing happened. So hopefully, you know, when things get sorted out a little bit, Natalie, you'll get to the bottom of it and it'll give you some peace. Anna, one of the questions that came across, I think it's the one that you were talking about, is oh, now I lost it. Well, she's asking, what can we do to help with changing, you know, getting our voice out there to change the laws, because that's the problem. It is like the underlying big problem is that our laws don't protect them. And when the laws don't protect them, then nobody cares. And so they're not getting good veterinary.
Donate to Joey's Legacy. That's what you can do. Donate to Joey's Legacy. If we're going to change laws, it's going to take people.
Yeah,
Thank you,
it
Dr.
does.
Cannizzaro. Thank you.
It absolutely is true. Like it's public sentiment. Public sentiment. Like I was so excited to learn about Joey's Legacy when I first heard from Scott. I was like, oh my God, I've been waiting for this for years, because it's amazing. But the law. I've told this probably to everybody, is the last to the party. It changes after public sentiment has changed everything else. So when you're looking to get things changed, it's really getting the word out, kind of openly talking about that, you know, your animals, you know, you have an emotional bond with your animal, and that's something that has to be recognized. And I don't say this to punish vets or something like that. It's just because I know that this is over, you know, according to the APPA, the pet industry market statistics, you know, this is over $100 billion industry. The pet industry expenditures are listed at over $100 billion. Okay, so, you know, animals, companion animals, as they should be called, you know, are big business. So you do have considerable pushback in changing the status of animals as just pure property. Now, you know, there have been laws in other, you know, other countries, and that have started to recognize sentience of animals, you know, that they have thoughts, feelings, you know, desires beyond what we might attribute to them. But also, you know, the fact in companion animal issues is that we would not spend this amount of money to fix a toaster. Okay, when our animals get hurt, we spend a lot of money because we have a bond with them. You know, it's just like, you know, I mean, it sounds horrible, but, you know, you walk by people every day that, you know, maybe need help in that, and you don't give them help because they're not your family or your friend or someone you know or care about. You know, yeah, we care about our animals because they're a bond that we have in our life that we care very deeply about. And when we spend these thousands of dollars, you know, to bring our animals back to health or to get help, you know, we would expect that the person providing that care understands that there is a bond there, and that bond has value, and it's monetary value, because if it had no value, then, you know, animals would just be discarded when they got sick or hurt. But we don't do that. And
Yeah.
it's time to talk openly about that these bonds need to be compensated if there are issues, if there are problems, you know, and that's why, you know, you can ask your vet, you know, if it were me, if I won the lottery tomorrow, you'd see billboards everywhere that said, ask your vet if he thinks your dog is a toaster, because that's, you know, what I really think that, you know, people need to start realizing is that, one, it's not at all, there is no machismo or, you know, whatever it is. And, you know, deciding that you shouldn't love, you know, an animal. It's like, no, of course you can. You know, they're a living being just like any other person that you know, part of your family or that you care about, you love. And so, you know, recognizing that and recognizing that that bond has value, that a value that has spurred an over $100 billion industry, is something that needs to, you know, the laws need to catch up. Some of the states have adopted, like Illinois, and at least in parts, you know, of it. And, you know, other states, you know, are looking at actual value. So the value of that animal to the owner or the guardian, the person who cares about the animal, recognizing that, yeah, you know, my animal means more to me than my animal does like to Carrie, you know, because, you know, Carrie doesn't know my animal. So, you know, if she runs over my animal, yeah, she'll feel bad about it, but she won't be as devastated as I am, you know. And so recognizing this in cases of negligence, you know, is something that needs to be done. But also just, you know, recognizing that, you know, animals are, you know, they're not property like tables, toasters, or chairs. You know, they are sentient beings, and, you know, we care for them. And the reason that pain medications exist for them is because they feel pain. And that's one of the things that, you know, most people don't recognize too, is that the law doesn't give anything really for the pain an animal feels. I mean, there's certain anti-cruelty, anti-torture laws, but a lot of that is directed towards the human that has felt pain because of what happened to their animal. There's very little that exists for the animal, you know, him or herself. So, I mean, just voicing this stuff, getting the public sentiment to change, like recognize that my animal has value, and that value is not a replacement value. It's the value to me.
Well, the reason why that's so important is because if we can raise the value, then they raise the standard, because they have to. So they kind of go together, right? If a veterinarian is like, if I only hire one person for 800 dogs and something goes wrong, it's going to cost me a lot of money. So I better hire more staff. And so the two things go together hand in hand, which is really important. I'm going to let you talk, Dr. Cannizzaro, but real quick, I wanted to say the other thing you can do: don't go to those vets. When you think the standard of care is low, ask what the standard of care is there. If you don't think it's what it should be, tell them. Don't just go to another vet. Tell them, you know what, I think your standard is a little bit lower than what the standard of care is of the veterinarian down the street, so I think I'm going to go there. When we say those things, it speaks volumes. Veterinarians don't want to lose business. So if you want them to raise their standard of care, you have to talk about it. You have to say why you're not going back. Most people don't want confrontation. I agree. I don't either. But
as a consumer, you have tremendous market power. You don't realize that, but you have so much power.
So much power, so much power. If you walk into a veterinary hospital and it looks and feels like total chaos, walk out. Walk out. Just say, you know what, I'm sorry. I don't feel like this is a real comfortable place. You know, when it's chaos, that's when mistakes happen. And granted, they're mistakes and they're not on purpose, but those mistakes, unfortunately, can lead to the death of an animal. So use your voice, use your power. Tell them you want the standard to be higher. Find out if they do have, who's going to be in surgery. I always tell people, ask who is going to be in surgery with my dog. I want to know.
I still like the idea of a compassion certificate, but I understand that's going to be years in the making, where a veterinarian could get basically certified, if you will, that they say, look, if I make a mistake and I hurt your animal, I understand that I am going to be on the hook for the emotional damages to you for the loss of your animal. But I think that's something that, you know, that I think Joey's legacy, you know, may have, you know, in the works in the future, which would be pretty amazing. So like a standard, if you will, the good housekeeping standard or something where veterinarians agree that like, hey, I recognize that your animal means more to you, than a table chair or a toaster. And
well, I think we need I've talked about this with some of my vet friends about having it's really hard for a companion pet parent to know what's going on behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
But like we have those A ratings, right, on restaurants, those independent A ratings. We need an independent organization that goes into these vet hospitals and knows how many people work there, how they do, and they provide the standard. That's what we need, is so you could kind of follow around and be like, okay, these people have checked out their standards and they're higher than the average standard.
There are some, but I don't know how accurate they are, because you see it advertised by a lot of veterinary hospitals. And what I don't know is if they have non-veterinary people, or I shouldn't say non-veterinary, but maybe more neutral.
Yeah, that's like the
part of the process,
right? Like that's not what I'm talking about, but that's
AAHA.
Yeah.
That's probably what you're referring to.
I think that's probably what you're referring to, and I don't think that their standards are what I would want our standards.
Now, they cater to the larger hospitals that have a lot of toys and a lot of veterinarians. It's easier for them to get AHA certified, and the smaller practices can, but you see it more with the bigger practices where they have big toys and everything looks organized and clean, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the best standard of care there. Ask a lot of questions. If you're working with somebody that you don't feel comfortable with, you don't feel like they're willing to answer your questions and spend time with you to do so, I know we're all busy, then take it as a red flag. And I would also say, I know that I'm talking about plugging Joey's legacy, but it's important to realize that, as this has been said here already tonight, that people are what drive the change. And if people don't demand it, it doesn't happen. So you can demand it by putting your dollars forward to the organizations and the people, whether it's Joey's Legacy or other, that is supporting change for our companion animals. Additionally, get involved in politics, change the laws. And, maybe you don't think of yourself that way, but do it anyway. Get out there and speak for our sentient beings. I don't care if it's a deer in parks or in wildlife or a companion animal. All of them are sentient beings. I don't care which or who I freaked out because my handy person was really proud about how many spiders he killed down at my barn. I about had a meltdown over it. Of course, they're natural, predators to get rid of all those little pesky critters that I don't care for down at the barn. So I said, please don't kill my spiders. Please don't. I know some people are afraid of spiders, but maybe I'm too much of a tree hugger. I don't know. But anyway, I was freaking out about that. He said, oh, no, I think I only took out the bad ones. Well, I don't know how he determined the good from the bad. I'm not really sure, but I think he killed too many good ones. But get out there and change the laws, because if you know anybody who is influential at the county level and above, speak to them, work with them, and volunteer for them, run for office, do something proactive if you're that type of person or if you're not. And even if you're not, rise to the occasion, try it out. Why not?
I also want to note that there's some things that are being mentioned on the chat, and this is very true. There is a very powerful vet lobby, and that is usually the driving force in keeping animals from being considered anything but, I should say companion animals specifically, from being considered anything but property, in the sense that they want market value, things like that. So that's why somebody asked how expensive lobbyists are. They're very expensive. If you want one that's good, that knows the ropes and knows how to kind of maneuver. But it also, then that's why people kind of collect their kind of resources and try to put things together in places like Joey's Legacy, so that someone can be picked out to be a lobbyist, because it's not inexpensive. And the vet lobby is extremely powerful. I know that firsthand because, I would have to say like 7 years or so ago, I remember we marched, it might have been 5 or 7, I can't remember, but, marched down to Springfield. I even knew one of the senators, and we, he shared office space with me. He helped, we were trying to introduce legislation to have veterinarians licensed if they were going to be boarding, animals because we had a pretty powerful case of, alleged cruelty where a veterinarian had unfortunately, taken in a lot of animals through a contract, to serve as a shelter, and the animals were horribly treated. It was very, very bad. It was, or at least the allegations that were put forth, and it happened, in Dalton, Illinois, and so we tried to get something passed. In that room were like over 50 veterinarians and their lobbyists saying that how dare you, have us get a $25 license, because it would have allowed the state inspectors to come in and actually inspect the premises, and they didn't want that. And so it is an extremely daunting task. So just talking about it. Yeah.
That's so, I'm sorry. It's just, you're absolutely right. I don't think people realize that a veterinary hospital does not get checked by animal control. Like, I have a boarding facility and they come in and they check my facility, but a veterinary hospital, they don't check at all. And I find that very, very, very interesting that they can set up any kind of boarding facility and board as many dogs as they want. There's no limit on how many dogs they can board. And I'm not speaking to all vets. I always have to say that because I don't want someone to say that to me. I have a lot of vet friends, but I do know that boarding is the lowest totem pole for veterinarians. They're busy. They're working on animals that are sick. They're not paid, but so many people want to board in veterinary hospitals because they think, oh, the vet runs it. And I'm like,
well,
don't do it.
But yeah, don't be there. It's not, but it's not hopeless. That's the thing. It's not hopeless, because one of the things I learned by being there is that it's just that a lot of these issues, they don't run along like standard political parties or anything like that. It's really about a particular legislator's personal history with animals, or the people in their group, and you really, if you talk to them and explain to them, like, here's the basis behind it. This is a business issue. This is, when you look at the $100 billion a year pet products, out there, and you realize, like, why would this industry be given preference? Why are they allowed these exemptions that don't apply to others? This is something, especially when you're dealing with, the veterinarians, like, they've compiled a very powerful coalition, and just, to note that some of these, the state laws may differ, and they likely do differ, but a lot of them do not allow, don't have special inspections, for veterinary hospitals or anything to that end. But you're talking about it and bringing that to light, is something it's actually going to change things, because, the first question I usually, the first shock I usually get when I talk to clients is that, they're surprised to learn that a lot of the protections that are out there for people do not exist for people's animals, or, they don't, even though and even some judges I've talked to, didn't know that the laws were not where people thought they were, because there's certain like artificial limits that have been placed on them, and they've been placed on them by industries that have a very strong interest in keeping those damages low. But if we, as the consumers of these services, recognize it and say, hey, here is what I want you to pay attention to. I want you to know that when you're treating my animal, that I care about my animal and I love my animal. If you hurt my animal, I expect you to be responsible, and it's your fault. I expect you to have to pay. And I know that you're never going to feel the pain I feel. So the only way I can punish a business is through money. And that's how we punish all businesses, or not even punish, but try to compensate. Because when someone goes to court, the court can't give you your animal back. They can only give you money. And if the money is not high enough, if there's no actual, if there's no consequence to a wrongful act, then nothing will ever change. Right. And this is just something everyone knows, and it exists for every business. So to exempt a business for reasons that don't, make sense in today's society, it doesn't make sense. And that's something to talk about and just point this out, because I've had judges, when I tell them the purest form of hypocrisy is for a veterinarian who is, accidentally, or wrongfully, killed your animal, to say, oh, here's $200, go get another one, when you just paid them $2,000 or more to bring the animal back to health. It's like, no. Then if that were true, if all animals were worth only what you paid for them, then, most of us who get our animals from, the shelter for $50, or, maybe they're even free, they're even giving an animal a rabies vaccine, would be just fraud. Why would you pay more for that? Just go get another animal, get a fresh one, Doesn't make any sense.
Scott, what, because I'm going to have to let you guys go. Anna, thank you so much. Like,
I'm sorry. I know I come off too passionate.
No,
I apologize.
No, and that's absolutely what I love about it, because you're as passionate as Dr. Cannizzaro and I are, and that's why we always go way past the hour that we're going to do. And I feel like we could go for 12 more hours. I know I could, but I don't want to. I look behind Dr. Cannizzaro and I'm like, oh my God, it's so late for you guys. So I always start to feel so guilty and bad.
It's dark back there. Yeah.
Scott, where are we with the documentary? How are funds coming? I know we're how are we doing?
Very slow, not getting a good response. We asked for $5 a month, which will entitle you to these podcasts and a number of other benefits. Obviously, if you're watching this, you've already donated. Please tell your friends, family, anyone else who's passionate about companion animals, have them join us, make it as reasonable as possible. We can't get much lower than $5 a month. We count on numbers, response in large numbers to make the $5 a month be a reasonable number. So far, I mean, we've been able to do the sizzle reel, and we're waiting for additional funds so we can continue. The final product will be what it is. We want it to be as spectacular as possible, with as many interviews and features as possible. But John Bafar needs to be paid. He's got a film crew that needs to be paid, and there's travel expenses. The list goes on. Sure. We can sit and complain and talk, and how do we make change? Well, we can be part of that change if you help us with a small donation every month. I got a few issues I just want to bring up real quick. First of all, congratulations to the three of you as being installed as board members for Joey's Legacy for 2022. We have a total of 15 board members. And I would encourage all of those that submitted a question or an inquiry through the chat tonight. I was looking at them. They're all great ideas. I would encourage each one of you to reach out to one of the board members to see if they can, reach out to whoever needs to be contacted about trying to affect change. That's what the board will be there for. There's going to be a committee of 7, the New Ideas Committee, the Future Strategies Committee, whatever you want to call them. And we're hoping to really open up some doors in 2022 and start to make things happen legislatively. Another item I want to bring up is that I had a conversation with a new vet, hopefully a new vet, on Friday. He is going to contact me tomorrow and just confirm his desire to join our group, which is a good segue into my next subject, which you guys talked about earlier. We love our vets. We love our attorneys. Do not mistreat them. Do not confront them. Number one, you're probably not going to change their minds on an opinion. If you're asking them for their opinion on your case, you're probably not going to change their mind, because number two, they have 20, 30 years of experience, lots of education, and you probably don't. So if you don't like the first vet's opinion, that's fine. Is it possible you're right and they're wrong? Anything's possible. Is it likely? No. Just say thank you, come to me, and I'll provide you with vet number 2. And if you don't like that opinion, we'll go to vet number 3 until you decide that, well, maybe it's not what I thought it was. Okay. In a lot of cases, it is what you think it is, but in some cases it's not. You have to allow for that possibility. I was in that boat over 4 years ago. Okay. So I understand the emotion. And yes, when you lose a companion animal at the hands of another, like Anna said, it adds a level of not only grief and despair. Now you're talking about anger, rage, And in some cases, the desire to level the playing field or to get even, in other words, which of course you have to be very careful and not make yourself the bad guy by acting out. So please be rational and reasonable when you do that. Nothing makes my day more, like I'm hoping Monday's going to be a great day because we're adding a vet, and nothing ruins my day more than losing a vet. We've lost 3 or 4 vets over the past 4 years for that very reason. And I will tell you right now, and think what you want, if any vet or any one of our vets or attorneys comes to me and says, hey, this person was very rude to me, they were very discourteous, and they were attacking me verbally, that's all I need. There will be no trial. There will be a delete and block from Joey's Legacy Vet Mal Victims. No questions asked. Okay? Please restrain yourself when you deal with vets and attorneys. Okay? They make Joey's Legacy what it is. Without them, we are a support group for people that have lost their companion animals. There are many of those on Facebook. We want to be a support group plus, and we have been for 4 years. And in many cases, we're very successful. So please keep all that in mind. Okay, I'm done.
One thing,
All
can
right.
I add?
Well, yeah.
Just one thing real quick too, when the vets, if a vet gives you an opinion that's a negative, or I shouldn't say negative, but an opinion that they didn't see the breach of standard of care and then, didn't result in a loss, sometimes it's kind of good to step back, because without, one thing too, there's check your state laws, but with your attorneys in your state, but at least in Illinois, like, there are consulting experts. So if a vet tells you they don't see anything, that's not something that you have to disclose. I mean, the law wants you to reach out to experts and try to find out if you have a case first before you bring a case. So when you're talking to them, you want to, try to talk to them on the phone more than, send a lot of emails and things like that. But they're trying to help you because, like, they want you to get closure too, and if they don't see something that they can really solidly point to, remember that you're already up against a hurdle, because people tend to think that, veterinarians are just generally, and this is true for Dr. Cannizzaro, but, that they're good people and they want to help. It's not something that we in the legal profession ever really experience, because, everybody already assumes we got horns and a tail, and, that's how we operate. But for vets, there is a general, it's a bias, if you will, for people, for judges, for jurors. They already think this vet is going to be a good person. So for you to show that this vet has done something wrong and they harmed your animal, you need to have clear evidence as best you can, to bring to the court, because the last thing you want to do is go through a case and lose, and we've had cases we won, we've had cases we lost, and it hurts, when you lose a case and that it should have gone a different way. But there's sometimes, you just have to step back and you have to look and see, are these clear? Is it clear enough to make sense to an average juror? Because it's not, you're not going to be dealing with another vet on the other side. You're going to be dealing with, 6 to 12 people, that, they're going to be off the street. You don't know how they feel about animals. So you really have to understand that when they give you an opinion, they're doing their best. And if it's if it's an opinion that doesn't help you, most of the time you're not going to have to reveal that. You can go and get another opinion. But the vets aren't, the reason they're dedicating their time is they're trying to bring the standards up in their own community and hold accountable those who have breached those standards. And you've got to respect that.
Yeah.
Harry, can I say one more thing? Can I say one more thing real quick? I should have mentioned it before. Jerry Robb, Volume 2, Joey's Legacy, Seeking Truth and Integrity Veterinary Medicine is out. This is Volume 1. If you buy 3 hardcover Volume 2s, he'll send you a free Volume 1 hardcover. So if you want anybody interested in sending gifts, you can purchase the book at Jerry's website. Go to joeyslegacy.org, click on JL Robb at the top, JL Robb's book. Go down to where it says, I want a copy, and it'll take you right there.
Perfect.
Awesome.
All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you, everyone, for being here. having your
you.
questions, it helps guide us through. Your questions help everybody. So it's important when we do this that these questions came out. Olaf's story was amazing. I think we could learn so much just from that one story and what's going on, and working together and coming up with new ideas and things that we can do and ways that they can be presented. Remember to try to think ahead. What is the whole theme of this whole podcast tonight was, keeping our emotions intact as best we can and getting evidence, not just from the time that it happened, but beforehand. So make sure you're getting all of your stuff, get your necropsies, all of those things, so that we have the evidence that we do. Be kind to our veterinarians and our attorneys that are working hard to try to help you as much as possible, because we can't afford to lose anybody. With that, I just want to say good night to everybody, and thank you so much, Scott. Always, thank you so much for putting this organization together. Dr. Cannizzaro, your time is amazing. You always spend so much time with us. And Anna, just a blessing to have you guys be part. I'm happy to be part of the board with you.
Oh, very much looking forward to it.
I'm honored. And knowledge is power. So don't forget that, please. Audience, knowledge is power. And Scott, thank you. Everybody's wonderful as usual.
Thank you guys very much.
Good night, everybody.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night.